Yeah, I know they're fun, just be careful with that. Howdy. There are times when an animated film will financially flop. It can be a case of bad word of mouth, failed advertising, or real-life events might get in the way. But sometimes a movie is just abysmal and nothing can save it. And speaking as someone who's had a lot of videos that have bombed recently, this topic felt close to my heart. So let's check out the biggest animated box office bombs. Careful, buddy. Turning Red. I think this is the first Disney film I've found that says it was directly inspired by anime. In fact, to capture that anime effect, hand-drawn 2D animation was drawn on top of Pixar's more standard 3D animation. And damn, does the final movie pop! The vivid colors, the vibrant movements, it's among my favorite animation styles Disney has ever done. Raya and the Last Dragon being my favorite. But the movie itself involves a story cliche I'm so tired of. A young lady just wanting to be herself is held back by her oppressive authority figure, and she has to go against that authority figure's wishes to show who she really is. But the parents come around in the end. Here's a crazy spin for you, Disney. What if the authority figure doesn't come around? Because in our real world, sadly, that happens a whole lot. A lot of families split up over personal beliefs, and that's fair. Anyway, our story follows Mei Lin, a teenage Chinese-Canadian student. But something has started happening to this teenager's body. The story's basically about puberty, if puberty turned you into a giant Instagram-friendly red panda. But like any Pixar movie, it wasn't cheap to make. $175 million over 4 years production to be precise. And 4 years was still the fastest production of a Pixar movie ever. But unfortunately, as visually beautiful as it was, Turning Red bombed badly. In fact, the movie was ranked first on a list of the biggest money losers based on worldwide earnings on the film industry website The Numbers. The main reason it bombed? Well, the movie was released in 2022, and you might remember a global plague was happening at the time, leading to a very small theatrical release and mostly being released on Disney+. But on Disney Plus, people love this movie. In fact, in USA, Turning Red was the second most watched program on all streaming services for all of 2022. Don't worry, not all these animated bombs will be due to the pandemic. But it was such a gigantic part of the 2020s, it's basically impossible to ignore its worldwide effect on movies at the time. Fun side note, there was actually some censorship of this movie as well, but only in Kuwait in the Middle East, which refused to distribute the film due to its quote-unquote explicit depictions of puberty and other mature themes.
Puberty can be difficult, and almost everyone goes through it. What's wrong with the movie talking about that?
Well, there's certainly nothing wrong with that in my opinion, but at least Kuwait was in the minority on censoring it. In fact, critics were 95% positive to this movie on Rotten Tomatoes. Personally, I adored the colors and animation, even if the oppressive authority cliche bugs me to no end. What was the critic consensus, hon?
Heartwarming, humorous, beautifully animated, and culturally expansive. Turning Red extends Pixar's long list of family-friendly triumphs.
Even if Turning Red wasn't a financial hit, it's clear it gave a lot of people a fun movie to watch, in a time where a lot of people needed a pick-me-up. Now this next one is a weird one. You see, which wasn't a flop, was it? It had so much advertising. It lost how much? Okay, let's briefly talk about it. For a good while, Wish was the punching bag of the internet. There were so many thumbnails of poor Ash's face with titles like Disney is over or that Wish was made by AI? I never got that one. No, Wish was not made by AI. In fact, it was made by the chief creative officer of Disney at the time, Jennifer Lee. All Wish was a badly written Disney movie. And if a studio is around for a century and occasionally tries to innovate, that's gonna happen. Either we get the occasional mistake or we get nothing but Disney live-action remakes. I know which I'd prefer.
Mistakes, right?
The mistakes, yes. Anyway, Wish lost Disney a big chunk of change, $131 million. and it's among the lowest rated Disney animated movies in recent history. Personally, I mostly remember how much I hated that stupid goat Valentino. The writing just felt all over the place, and I just couldn't figure out this villain. I could barely understand the stupid overcomplicated wish system of how you give your wishes to the king, then they go into a lottery. This analogy is just so weird and vague to me. And to me, Asha felt like an amalgamation of every Disney go-getter princess for the last 40 years. But given the movie's a celebration of Disney's last 100 years, maybe that's intentional.
You know, we watched Wish together 6 months ago, and I don't remember a thing about it.
I barely remember it either. There's scenes from Disney movies like Elemental I can record in a heartbeat, but this was about as memorable as the crust on a bread loaf. Anyway, you've probably already heard 1,000,001 people already complain about Wish, so let's move on. Our next choice is Delgo. Hang on, this was a movie that was repeatedly requested that I review? That boring old movie I first put on Worst Animated Movies 8 years ago? Come on, what else is there to say about this ugly fantasy snorefest? Well, I'll make it quick. Here's how I originally summarized it without that annoying twang of my 20s. I wonder if I can do it without that weird gesticulation I used to do in all my old videos. The land looks manure-covered, and the humans look like broken 3D models. And opposing races look like generic World of Warcraft lizards. That's so distracting. Why did I used to do that? It's like saying, look at me, I'm on the spectrum. Anyway, I then go on to describe that the movie looks like a swarm of bees, which I guess is pretty accurate. Oh look, there I am. Sorry about the sweat pits, by the way. I was a no-cash university student who couldn't afford air conditioning. To call Delgo an unloved box office bomb would be the understatement of the century. As that stupid bum in the red shirt indicates, this movie cost like $40 million to make, but only pulled in 700, 800 grand, give or take. At the time, that was the worst opening ever for a film opening in over 2,000 theaters. In fact, it was so unpopular that it was pulled from theaters 1 week after being released. And it got a fine rating of 11% on Rotten Tomatoes. What'd the critics say, hun? How about Claudia?
404, page not found. This thing no longer exists.
Oh, well, how'd her summary put it?
The story is tedious, noisy and banal. It's too convoluted for children but has the familiar bombast of a video game.
What did the next review say?
404, page not found.
Oh, never mind. Delgo was about as fun to people as a colonoscopy.
But I haven't had one of those.
Oh, well, they're important, but not generally fun. You should get one by 45 though.
Now we know!
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
Our next bomb is Space Jam: A New Legacy. I dislike this movie far more than I should have, because I adore Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck.
Gosh, ain't I a stinker?
Look at this, Nin got me this Bugs Bunny card 4 years ago and I still have it on my fridge. That there? That's Bugs Bunny. But this? I don't know what this furry contraption is, but it sure ain't Bugs Bunny.
Holy codfish, look at my feet! Continue to draw me like this, buddy, and we'll both be out of wake.
Just why? What am I listening to here? I can't defend the original Space Jam much, but at least Michael Jordan had a humble, reserved performance. This LeBron James yell just kinda sums up his whole performance to me. Oh, I just can't unhear it. Not so poor James LeBron actually won a Golden Raspberry nomination for Worst Actor in this film. And that's a kind of award normally reserved for Tommy Wiseau levels of acting in the room. Hang on, Duck, just keep down for a second.
It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
Anyway, how'd this mess bomb? There was certainly no shortage of marketing for this film. In fact, Warner Brothers partnered with over 200 brands worldwide to promote Space Jam 2. Footwear, sportswear, Monopoly, even Connect 4. On Xbox One, it even got a tie-in video game. I'd love to argue that Space Jam 2 failed because, well, viewers can smell a bad movie. But it was 2021 and a lot of people were still indoors due to the whole plague thing. In theaters, Space Jam 2 grossed about $163 million around the world. That may sound like a lot, But when a movie costs $150 million to produce and countless millions to market, well, 163 just wasn't enough, and this ended up a bomb for Warner Brothers. It probably didn't help that it was simultaneously released on HBO Max, but at least we all got a chance to be safe and stream the mediocrity for ourselves. Oh, fun fact, Warner Brothers originally tried to bring Michael Jordan back for Space Jam 2, but understandably, he refused to return.
Can I go home now?
What's something positive I can say about this movie? Well, I did like the creativity of this multiverse virtual basketball game they made, but critics just couldn't forgive the endless product placement. Oh, what subtlety! Or the tacky writing and unfunny dialogue. Critics also had an issue with what I have an issue with in modern movies. Space Jam 1 managed a comfortable 87-minute runtime. This movie had even less to say and somehow still managed to bloat its runtime to 2 hours. And if you've ever been to a movie screening of kids, you know that is far too long for kids to sit still. 90 minutes is pushing it. I think the critic consensus on Rotten Tomatoes captured the issues well.
A new legacy trades the zany meta-humor of its predecessor for a shameless and tired exercise in IP-driven branding.
But I'm right behind the critics and I didn't mind this one bombing. Fun fact, this video was not sponsored by some samey Skinnerbox gambling mobile game you don't give two craps about. Personally, I never advertise those. Instead, this was sponsored by someone much more important to me. You. At this point, it's just my Patreon keeping the lights on now and keeping me making regular videos. So if you would like to decide on future videos, get exclusive Patreon videos, or just help keep my charity streams and videos happening, consider checking out my Patreon link in the description. Every couple of bucks really does help, and it's the only reason I'm still able to be here. And you're a sponsor I can actually like and respect and not feel bad about pitching. With that said, thanks for listening and let's continue the video. Next up, let's chat about how Onward bombed.
That's right, Dad. It's me, Barley.
Critics like Onward a lot. They thought it was a solid film. It was even nominated for Best Animated Picture, but to me personally, it was just okay. I remember seeing it and feeling underwhelmed, but maybe that was more a byproduct of how crappy I was feeling and a lot of people were feeling at the time. Onward was released in 2020 when all hell broke loose. Many people just weren't feeling particularly spiffy at the time. I'm not feeling particularly spiffy this year either. 2020's been a rough decade. Anyway, what's a story, Morning Glory? Two brothers, Ian and Barley, are two elves living in a suburban world among other mythical creatures, and they resurrect their father with wizardry.
It's a wizard staff. Dad was a wizard.
What? Hold on.
But they can only resurrect their dad for 24 hours. Even worse, they could only revive his torso. And I wonder if this left the Elven brothers feeling how I felt about this movie. Surprised, yet underwhelmed and disappointed at the same time. But I do have to admire what a personal, raw place this movie came from. The director Dan based the story on when his father died in a car accident when he and his brother were very young. Honestly, even if the movie bombed, I hope the creators of this movie know their heartfelt story was still appreciated by many viewers in a difficult time.
He's very proud of the person you grew up to be.
The movie's production budget was a whopping $175 to $200 million, but it only managed to recover $142 million. Again, Disney doesn't do cheap films. I definitely think the main issue was the global pandemic. When Onward came out, a lot of theaters were completely closed. I remember seeing it on Disney Plus at home like a lot of other people. But I think it's also worth mentioning that Onward faced a fair amount of censorship. It was banned in multiple Middle East markets like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Why? Well, in one brief scene, the Lady Cyclops police officer gently indicates that she's a lesbian. And, well, I simply can't help the people who think this somehow makes it worth being banned. It was also censored in Russia due to the quote-unquote Russian gay propaganda law, but I'm too burnt out to analyze that one right now. But know that at least here, you're always in a safe space. In lighter news, Onward received not super hot, but warm reviews from critics. You'll probably get what I mean from its consensus.
Although it's no Pixar classic like Toy Story, Onward stands on its own as a funny, heartwarming, and dazzlingly animated adventure.
Another critic who had mixed thoughts on Onward was my friend Pup. He's a massive Pixar fan, but he didn't feel Onward quite stick the landing. What did you think, Pup?
Onward is by no means a bad film. It gets by purely just on the themes of loss, grief, and appreciating what you have while it's there. But what separates Onward from Pixar's greats to me is that Onward doesn't really have those iconic characters to back those themes up. Sure, those Toy Story films have themes of loyalty, abandonment, growing up and moving on, but those films would not be what they are without their incredible cast of characters led by Sheriff Woody and Buzz Lightyear. More so than being the studio that makes grown adults cry, Pixar is probably best known for its incredible characters. Mike and Sully, The Incredibles, Marlon and Dory, these are the things that really resonate with people beyond anything else. And Onward doesn't really have that. Its two central protagonists can best be described as Elf Tom Holland and Elf Chris Pratt. Great characters are what make the best Pixar films shine the most, and Onward just comes up a little short in that department.
Onward deserved far better than being a box office bomb, that's for sure. Alright, boss. Our next bomb is Teenage Kraken by DreamWorks.
As a Kraken who is barely pulling off this whole human thing, I need to be there.
Oh, Ruby is so adorable. How can you not like this design? It's like if a kitten turned into a sea creature. Then that creature turned into a giant monstrous sea Cthulhu. Unfortunately, this great sea kraken sank like a stone. It cost $70 million to make, but only pulled in $46 million. But honestly, give me this over Wish any day. But Teenage Kraken was the second lowest grossing film in DreamWorks history behind Spirit Untamed. And even then, Teenage Kraken had the lowest grossing weekend of any DreamWorks film in history. What the hell happened?
I don't know.
Well, this is another movie where we've got a pretty original idea. A teen comedy about a sea kraken. Tell me if you've ever seen that before. I haven't.
Okay, maybe it's the whole don't look at me vibe, but there's something different about you.
Unfortunately, I didn't even know this movie was released, and I didn't feel like I was the right demographic when I learnt about it. Personally, I was a teenager when Sabrina the Teenage Witch was on. And do teenagers even watch much DreamWorks animation? Critics speculated a similar issue.
Teenage Kraken drowned at the box office. The movie had an unclear target demographic, and the trailer was a baffling experience. I also saw no promotion for it.
And yeah, I don't remember any promotions either. Though it probably also didn't help, it was released alongside Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I mean, technically that was also a box office failure, but that had a ridiculously bloated budget of $387 million, so go figure. Another problem I noticed is, do teenagers even know what a kraken is? Is it like a sea god? Let me look it up. A gigantic tentacled sea monster of Scandinavian myth. Poor Ruby also had a tough act to follow, given this came out after Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which is considered a modern animated classic by me and like everyone I know. It's a shame when these original animated movies fail because the animated landscape is so dominated by sequels and spin-offs nowadays. So part of me is always sad when a beautiful, original animated movie, with nothing technically bad about it, just doesn't find its audience. It unfortunately can send a message to studios that we don't want anything original, we just want remakes and sequels. And that's a real shame to me. On my 50th birthday, will I really only be getting Shrek 36 and Toy Story 11 and SpongeBob's Journey to the Fridge? I mean, I can complain, but I didn't see Teenage Kraken in movie theaters either, so I sent that message to studios too. Still, if you're curious now, Teenage Kraken should be available on streaming services. Our next bomb is Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas. Sadly, Sinbad was yet another sign to animation studios that 2D animation just didn't sell anymore in the 2000s. Because Shrek came out 3 years before Sinbad in 2001 and ate its lunch. But what a waste to not be using at least some 2D animation nowadays, because just look at Eris, the goddess of chaos and discord.
Hey, Josh.
No, different discord, like, conflict. But she's so freaking cool. Look how ethereal she's portrayed and how she seems to be suspended within the vast emptiness of space-time as she plans how to bring chaos to our planet. The star constellations freaking shift and form into giant monsters to do her bidding. This is what modern 2D animation can do, and we just don't see this anymore, because no one watches 2D animation animation movies. I mean, unless you're like Studio Ghibli or the Simpsons movie or the Bob's Burgers movie, I can't think of that many examples. And Michelle Pfeiffer is just chewing the scenery as the voice actor. This is the kind of scene I can't even imagine in 3D, and I think it's a loss to us we don't get to see these sort of 2D scenes on the big screen anymore. Oh, and Sinbad is a devious, swashbuckling pirate thief trickster? Oh boy, never heard that before. Oh neat, he's voiced by Brad Pitt, though I think I preferred his role in Fight Club.
No, it is not. How much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight? I don't want to die without any scars.
I love how concise the 45% review for this was on Rotten Tomatoes.
Competent, but not magical.
Yep, this'll do.
But let's get to the meat and chips. How did such a beautifully animated movie become a box office bomb? Was it the fierce competition at the time? Sinbad managed to earn $6.9 million in its opening weekend, since it was competing against such cinematic masterpieces as Legally Blonde 2. That sounds stupid just by its name. Oh, and Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle, and Rugrats Go Wild. Oh dear. Yeah, 2004 wasn't exactly all sunshine and rainbows for cinema. Fun fact, I skipped Sinbad that weekend because a friend had invited me to see Charlie's Angels. And as a tween, I didn't yet know that movies could be that bad. Anyway, globally, Sinbad managed a total of 80 million, causing a big loss of 125 million for DreamWorks Animation. Ouch, the more I research this vid, the more I realize why we don't get 2D animated movies anymore. At the time of Sinbad, Katzenberg was running DreamWorks, and his disappointed comments kinda said it all.
The idea of a traditional story being told using traditional animation is a thing of the past.
Yep, 3D only from here on out. And a lot of Shrek sequels, and Cars sequels. A similar story was being told for Disney at the time as well. Disney's 2D Home on the Range was a huge box office failure the next year, while their Finding Nemo 3D movie grossed $936 million. The big animated studios were getting a clear picture that 2D animated movies generally just didn't sell anymore, and that's a real shame. Our next bomb is Lightyear. Oh boy, this film was expensive, costing $200 million. Pixar put a lot of effort into this movie for 5.5 years, even adding special cameras to set, specifically for IMAX theaters. But it was so expensive that Disney just couldn't make their money back and lost $100 million from this movie. I think Lightyear's box office failure draws attention to an interesting modern day issue. Animated movies have gotten really expensive to make. 2D movies are cheaper, but as we've seen, they just don't sell anymore. And hiring expensive talent for the movie can take a big portion of that budget. I don't know if this was the case for Lightyear, but a similar thing happened in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and Dolittle. Technically, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny was a bomb, but it didn't perform terribly. It just wasn't the biggest thing in the world. But it was so expensive to produce and bring Harrison Ford back. It required a huge box office to make back its expenses. Dolittle, for example, paid Robert Downey Jr. $20 million just for his involvement, and Harrison Ford was paid $25 million for Dial of Destiny. Actually makes me feel less bad about the $98 advertising revenue I made on my last main video. Anyway, on Lightyear there was no shortage of marketing for it. The teaser trailer for Lightyear received 83 million views in the first 24 hours. The main trailer even aired at the Super Bowl. And LEGO released 3 sets based on the film. Ferrari even announced that Lightyear would sponsor one of their cars in the 2022 Grand Prix. There's rarely any shortage of buzz when it comes to Pixar. Yeah.
Stop it.
Though some of the censorship of the film in certain countries probably didn't help. The Muslim world banned the film due to a same-sex kiss. But props to Disney on what they did. When countries requested that Disney remove the scene, they didn't. Hell yeah, good on you, Disney. Indonesia authorities suggested that Disney think about countries that consider LGBT kissing sensitive. On the plus side, critics on Rotten Tomatoes mostly enjoyed the movie.
Lightyear settles for being a conventional origin story instead of reaching for the stars. But this gorgeously animated adventure manages to accomplish its mission. Straightforward fun.
In total, Lightyear grossed $226 million. It's a bomb purely because movies are so stupidly expensive now. And here we have a few honorable mentions. Some of these movies weren't quite bombs, or I simply ran out of room to talk about them. Elemental. This was probably the most requested movie for me to talk about, but it's not a bomb. But it was a sleeper hit. See, it had a dismal opening by Pixar standards at around 29 million. But despite this mediocre opening, it eventually managed to double its money. And it's so good to see an original animated movie like this doing well. Elemental had a big budget of 200 million, but it made a return of 496 million. That's sure no bomb, and it deserves the attention. It's a great movie. When I first watched Elemental, I really felt in the shoes of Ember, a fire immigrant in a land of water, a place where her element just isn't considered. But the other main character, Wade, personally, he just kind of annoyed me. And that's crazy, because I'm someone who's emotional enough to cry at the end of Avengers Endgame. But Wade was too much of a sap, even by my standards. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being emotional, obviously. I'm just saying I personally didn't enjoy him, I didn't like him. But I love some of the timeless imagery in this movie, like when Wade's and Ember's hands touch together. Isn't that beautiful? I think the critic Clarice summarized this movie really well.
3 out of 5. Gentle and humane, but never raw and vulnerable.
But given what a giant sleeper hit this was at the box office, you probably already know that Elemental was well worth your time. The Rescuers Down Under. Mate, this was way better than a sequel to The Rescuers had any right to be. This was one of the movies stuck in my VHS when I was a kid. I would play it over and over and over. And in my opinion, it's way better than the original. The original Rescuers I personally found dull, cutesy, and contrived. Is that a hot take? I don't know what people think of the Rescuers. But either way, this sequel had some edge. 8-year-old Cody is locked up in a cage by poacher McLeach for days, then nearly drowned and fed to the crocodiles. It's pretty brutal. And the mice Bianca and Bernard are a great team in this movie, basically using every resource they can to rescue this kid. As someone who's lived in Australia his whole life, I appreciate that this movie captures how ruthless and unpredictable the Australian outback can be. Yeah, it's beautiful, but it can be freaking dangerous as well, and this movie knows it. And no musicals, thank Jeebus. I have never liked Disney musicals, so this was so refreshing to me. But to the point, yes, this movie was a bomb. It grossed about 47 million worldwide. To be fair, it was competing against Rocky V and Home Alone at the time. And at the time, Home Alone was the biggest thing in the world. That movie was huge. Next up, we have Mars Needs Mums. This is one I chatted many years ago about in my worst Disney movies. This one was requested by a few people, but what do I say about this ugly, mediocre Disney movie that no one wanted? The motion capture CG feels like it belongs in 2004 because it's so uncanny, yet it was made in 2011. This movie is actually one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. Despite its hefty budget of 150 million, it barely turned in 39 million. But a more interesting fun fact about it, did you know the main kid Milo was originally played by Seth Green? You know, Chris from Family Guy. The Seth Green version was fully done, and it sounds hilarious.
I got hired to play a kid, and the thought was that they'd always have a real kid do the voice in it.
Let her go! Let her go! Mom!
I actually think I would have preferred this movie if Chris from Family Guy kept playing Milo. Oh, and Milo's mum actually plays Jessie from Toy Story. That might be why she sounds familiar. It's a small world after all, eh?
I get it.
Thanks, Sonny. Moving on. Road to El Dorado. Kaboom! What a bomb. 95 million budget with a 76 million return. Much like the road trip comedy Emperor's New Groove, this road trip comedy also had a lot of rewrites. Jeffrey Katzenberg just couldn't decide on an audience for this movie. It was rewritten a crazy amount of times. The main anti-heroes Miguel and Tulio were originally written to be more raunchy, but then they were toned down. First it was a drama, then it was an adventure comedy with a PG-13 rating due to a steamy romance. Then to make it a more broadly appealing PG, the love interest Shell was given less scantily clad clothing, and the steamy romance stuff was toned right down. It was a mess. And despite all the team's efforts to appeal to everyone, it ended up a bomb. Critics weren't too kind to the movie either.
predictable story and thin characters make this movie flat.
Personally, I just couldn't stand that stupid cliche of native people thinking foreigners are gods. But again, I've gotta mention this animation. I love the mixture here of CG and 2D animation. I love the greens and the blues, and the tropical island setting is actually my favorite setting in all of film. I'd say the visuals of Road to El Dorado made this movie worth it to me. Black Cauldron, the fabled film that almost killed Disney. So yes, it was definitely a box office bomb. And also the first Disney movie to ever receive a PG rating. And one look at the Horned King probably gives you an idea why. This guy's one of the coolest looking villains ever, but he could also melt the skin off his victims, so go figure. This movie had such a weird tone to me. It's about an assistant pig keeper who wants to be a warrior. Yes, he'll meet a princess along the way, and yes, he looks way too silly to fight a villain as cool looking as the Horned King. Box office wise, this was a huge failure for Disney at the time. In 1985, the Black Cauldron's budget was about $44 million, which is about $155 million now. In fact, at the time, it was the most expensive animated film ever made. Yet the movie barely made $21 million, which was less than half of its budget. This was a huge loss for Disney at the time and put the entire animation department in threat of disappearing. Basil the Great Mouse Detective was released next and had a considerably smaller budget at $14 million. But luckily, it was a success in theaters, making $50 million, which kept Disney going to become the beast it is today. Next up, we have Atlantis. I can't think of an animation style quite like Atlantis. And what a soundtrack! But all I can hear when the main character Milo speaks is Marty McFly from Back to the Future. Atlantis wasn't quite a financial bomb in theaters, just lackluster, so it's only an honorable mention here. I quite like how Thomas Schumacher, the then president of Walt Disney Animation, expressed his disappointment with it.
It seemed like a good idea at the time to not do a sweet fairy tale, but we missed.
To be fair, Atlantis was competing with Shrek at the time, another sign to studios that, sadly, 2D animation was going out of fashion with audiences. On a side note, this is one of the most atmospheric trailers I've seen on a movie in years. Unlike a lot of modern movie trailers, it doesn't spoil anything, and it takes time to build the atmosphere. Isn't that nice? Okay, that should be every imported animated failure. Oh yeah, that's Moses Jones. Oh yeah, and Rocky and Bullwinkle, yeah. Yes, I know Rise of the Guardians was a cult classic. But don't give me that look, I tried my best. We're way over time as is. We're moving on to our last few choices. Our next box office bomb is The Iron Giant. Jeepers, talk about movies that deserve better. We've covered a lot from modern times, how about something from the late 90s? This film bombed badly at the box office, grossing $31 million worldwide while costing $50 million to make. Again, movies like this were an unfortunate nail in the coffin for 2D animation. Bombs like this one, and the ones I talked about before, well, they're part of the reason we mostly see 3D animated movies nowadays. Iron Giant and Quest for Camelot both bombed badly quite close to each other. And it showed to Warner Brothers and other companies that many people simply weren't interested in 2D animation the way they used to be. Sadly, 2D animation was seen as quote-unquote for kids by many people. Despite like The Simpsons and Family Guy, people saw it that way. I don't know, it was weird. I guess at the time, like Simpsons and King of the Hill, they were the exceptions. Anyway, we're off topic. I guess because of movies like Shrek and Toy Story, 3D animation was seen as more for the whole family, often with adult jokes thrown in. Toy Story and Shrek were unbridled successes, so they kinda set the standard. So we get 2D animation was losing its luster. Did anything else make The Iron Giant bomb? Because this was an amazing movie. Well, as a kid, I never saw The Iron Giant advertised. Apparently, Warner Brothers didn't bother marketing this movie much because, as I said, they were skeptical about 2D animation. Because the previous year, they tried marketing the cojones out of Quest for Camelot, with tons of promotional licensing and even fast food toys from Wendy's and Scholastic kids books. All of that marketing, but the 2D animation bombed anyway. Honestly, I don't blame that on 2D animation. I'd much rather see Iron Giant than Quest for Camelot. I know we could have talked about Quest for Camelot. It lost Warner Brothers like $40 million, but do you honestly care? I don't. Iron Giant, in my opinion, is a way better movie. Let's talk about that. I think if I ever discuss the 20 best animated movies, this will definitely be a contender. I saw Iron Giant at school when my teacher brought it in, because it was released on videocassette. Unlike Disney movies, I didn't get to see this a million times on VHS. This may sound silly, but I kinda related to the Iron Giant. As a tall, gangly, socially awkward guy who walks a lot at night, a lot of people cross the road when they see me coming. But I also think I'm a relatively gentle person, so I felt the giant's pain a lot when he was treated like a monster. Does that make sense? I don't know. The movie's 1957 Cold War setting and the gentle but powerful voice of the giant always stood out so much to me.
Can you do that? Blah, blah, blah.
Hell, this entire 100-foot tall giant is just so attention-grabbing. And those ridiculously expressive eyes. And there's so many scenes he just cracked me up purely with his awkward body language. I particularly remember the ending. It still tears me up all these years later.
You are who you choose to be.
But there's another interesting scene I could always instantly recall from when I was a kid. Hogarth's the kid that finds the giant, and Hogarth and the giant eventually find a deer, but they sadly witness the deer killed. But when the giant tries to touch the dead deer, Hogarth feels uncomfortable and demands he not touch the dead body. It's a strangely intense and real moment when we're confronted of how a living creature can instantly transform to a body or just meat. I've never heard a line quite like this other one too.
It's bad to kill, but it's not bad to die.
Dying isn't bad, but killing is. Isn't that powerful? All very memorable. Only one big nitpick I have. I've never liked the villain Kent, or how uncomfortable it is the way he stalks the young boy Hogarth. You definitely wouldn't see this in 2025. You just wouldn't. Though it's certainly not the creator's fault this hasn't necessarily aged well, so I try and just put it aside. Anyway, despite the poor movie attendance, I certainly wasn't the only one who loved this movie. Critics enjoyed the movie's story, voice acting, animation, and music, and it deservedly won 9 Annie Awards. The movie became a cult classic through home video releases. Otherwise, my teacher might never have brought it in, and I might never have seen this movie. Warner Brothers certainly wasn't going to tell me about it. Personally, I'd watch Iron Giant 10 times over watching E.T. once. Nothing against E.T., I just like this movie way better. And last, and most certainly least, Foodfight.
If I had a raisin for every time I've heard that one.
Want some Brand X? It can't be any less digestible than this bucket of dreck. I stand corrected.
Brand X, it's different but all the same.
I'd call bringing up Foodfight beating a dead horse, but I was beating this dead horse when I was talking about it back in 2016. At this point, I've cremated the horse, mourned him for 8 years, and put his urn on my TV cabinet. Now I know what you're thinking. Foodfight was shown in theaters? Well, yeah, some theaters. For example, it had a limited release in the UK. I mean, technically it made some box office. Worldwide, $120,000. You could buy a whole tenth of a house with that in Sydney. But in other places it was direct to video. I'd love to have been an audience where this was actually screened, just to see the parents and kids' reactions. Did they laugh? Did they cry? Did they leave the theater after 80 seconds realizing the horrors they'd signed up for?
Excuse me, Tuesday Whistle, sir, but I seem to be catching a draft up here.
Many years ago I discussed this as being the #1 worst animated movie that I was willing to talk about. Nostalgia Critic and many other critics didn't care for it either. This movie was perhaps the ultimate bomb, with a budget of about $45 to $65 million. That's a smaller amount than some of these other movies, but a box office return of $120,323 is pretty abysmal. On a side note, I find it really amusing when you have a box office so appallingly low that they have to count every individual dollar down to the last digit. Oh, that person bought a Kit Kat with their movie ticket. That's an extra $2.
Don't cry for me, Charlie Tuna.
What fascinates me about this movie is how enthusiastic the animators were to show off the scenery in their excrement-colored world of product mascots. The intro is presented like we're looking at this magical happy world with cheery pop music playing.
I am so excited to...
but it's more like I'm watching the city sewers after Taco Tuesday. I actually think my abysmal Go Animate cartoons look slightly more appealing to the eye than this. So much went wrong with this movie. The director was simply not suited to overseeing animation. The animators often complained about his haphazard micromanaging and having no understanding of animation, and they mentioned he brought his dogs into the studio regularly and would jump all over the animators. Brands that previously signed on to appear dropped out, like M&M's and Cheetos. Good call. Eventually, 2011, we got something. I don't know if I call it a movie, but I'd call it something. But this ramshackle mess of a sort of film we got was auctioned off for $2.5 million. Eventually, insurance was called on to complete the movie as quickly and cheaply as possible. One of the animators had this to say on the completed movie.
The film is already ruined. The investors are just trying to salvage what they can.
So their insurance company received the copyright to the film and released it.
What the fudge?
And given the abysmal reception you probably heard for the last 9 years, you can probably guess why it didn't make much money. It was so bad and so ugly, and I guess word of mouth spread quick. But hey, even if it's a bad movie, so many laughs have been brought to us over the years by just making fun of this movie.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a spam.
We've had a hell of a time with it. Like The Room, there's been a lot of ironic enjoyment. And for that, I'm not going to say appreciate the hard work of the animators, but I appreciate the kinda sorta work of the animators. You make lots of people laugh. I think something these bombs show us clearly is the world isn't always a meritocracy. We have a lot of extremely high quality, thought-provoking, entertaining movies out there, but not all of these movies ever got the eyeballs they deserved. Another take-home issue I found is how ridiculously expensive animated movies have gotten, to the point where it's hard to make that budget back unless your movie is like the biggest thing in the world for a couple of weeks. With that said, please take care of yourself and each other. Thanks for watching, and whether I see you next time or not, I'll be back. And thanks to my patrons who especially saved my rear this month, as it is the dreaded lowest revenue January-February months. Ugh. And of course, an extra thanks to my bosses in the patron shoutout tier. These people include Anna Jones, Thomas Fernando, or Stismic, Katie and Dalton, Angel Angeline, 3 Cat Day, Boqui Fan, The Furry of Fury, Cookie Monster, Shockwave FPS Studios, Miss Arceus, Noah C, Fluff Paws, Jacob Snyder, Joseph Bowers, Jenny Smith, Alistair, Jordan McCann, Chandler Amethyst, Alyssa Michelle, Stealth Diamond, Megan Bruns, Bubbles Dark, The Hug Wizard, Rayan Graves, Saturn Yoshi, Eagle Talon, William Johnson, I Cosmic, Indiecore, and Joe Ferry. Also, Garfield and Normal coming up.
1, 2, 3.
What are you doing?
Counting your chins.
Go away.
Hey Garfield, you're going to be 15? Zowie, 15! I didn't know anything was that old.
Don't push it, kid.
I mean, I thought Dirt was 11, maybe 12 years old?
I'm going to take a nap now, Normal. If you do so much as touch my food, I'll squash you flat, okay?
Knock, knock, knock.
Who are you?
Don't you remember? I'm Normal, the kitten you tried to starve a few years ago. I came back to repay old unkindnesses.
Here you go, little buddy. Enjoy, enjoy.
I must be dreaming. Hi, I'm Normal. I'm cute and you're not. I'm young and you're not.
I'm feeling fine and you're not.
Here I am, Normal, the world's cutest kitten.
What makes you think you're so cute?
Simple. All kittens are cute until they grow into cats and become ugly.
I didn't have to hear that.
I tell it like it is, baby cakes.
Our next choice is Titan AE. In case you don't know, Don Bluth is an animation legend. And this is the final movie he created. You know, the mastermind behind The Land Before Time, American Tail, and The Secret of NIMH. Basically, he made movies like Disney if they had a real edge. But after this gigantic box office failure, he seemed to just walk away from movies permanently. Titan AE lost 20th Century Fox about $100 million. This movie's budget was quite ambitious for the year 2000 at $75 to $90 million. That's about $145 million in 2025, so not chump change. But sadly, this only managed a box office of about $36 million. And a $100 million loss is gonna make some executives and shareholders very angry. One executive got so mad over this movie, he went and founded Illumination. So yes, this technically means we can indirectly blame Don Bluth for creating Minions. Dear me. I would have taken 20 years of Tiger over Minions any day. So what caused this disastrous bomb that inadvertently created the Minions? Well, the first problem I see, this is by far the most boring trailer I've ever seen. There's no freaking humans, no one talks. It's just spaceships going brrr, kaboom. I mean, this is 25 years later, so the marketer probably knows this by now. But when people see Star Wars, 99% of people buy tickets to see the human drama. In Return of the Jedi, the viewers remember the drama with Luke and Vader fighting in front of the Emperor, not the stupid TIE fighters outside. I actually think Reddit had a simple but apt point on this failing.
Animated sci-fi hasn't done well in a long time.
And when I looked back, I discovered they were kinda right. There was WALL-E, but that was the exception. When I looked back at sci-fi animated movies, we had 9, Iron Giant, the Astro Boy movie, and Treasure Planet. And all of those did badly or completely bombed. Again, I'm not saying it's all animated sci-fi, but a whole lot of them have done badly. Plus, the target audience here is vague. This was well before the days of Adult Swim. And Titan AE is an adult animation in a time where movie animation was seen exclusively as for kids. I think in this regard, Don Bluth was a bit ahead of his time. But this movie is too colorless and grim for most kids. Just listen to this crazy thing. Picture the land before time if it was the year 3028 and humanity was being destroyed by an alien race called the Druid made of pure energy. But like Land Before Time, saving the species is the name of the game here. It's a pretty bleak post-apocalyptic universe, and not exactly the bright, cheery colors audiences expected from animated movies in the year 2000. A lot of browns, actually. But damn, Blue still does that edge well here. I love how weird and creepy all these aliens are. Cool was that? Sends a shiver down my spine every time. It's an interesting combination of traditional animation with CG, but many critics felt the movie's story was too generic.
Great visuals, but the story feels like a cut and paste of other sci-fi movies. It crashes and burns on its own banality. A lot of money spent on a good-looking but uninvolving amalgamation of tired sci-fi tropes.
So not only were critics against it, but Fox Animation Studios had a lot of cutbacks. Over 300 animators were laid off during Titan AE's production. In fact, 10 days after this movie released, the entire Fox Animation Studio company closed down. Mr. Bluth, can't say he didn't leave an impact. It's a shame Titan AE had so many complications, and I hope all the team went on to more successful projects.